I start out with two questions.
Yeah, right? Sure.
Who are you?
Okay, I'm a software developer from a long way back. Oh geez, how far back do you want to go? I mean, I started learning code when I was 10 years old.
What's your name, first of all?
David Luebbert. Yeah, okay, thanks, Robert. You're Robert, this is Dean, I'm David.
Hey, can I do the quick intro?
Oh yeah, go ahead.
David was one of my first mentors at Microsoft.
Yeah.
So I showed up, I'm 21 years old.
Wow.
I am dripping behind the ears, right? I'm in this pool called Microsoft, and I'm trying to figure out which end is up, because these people write code, and these people do this, and these people do that.
Now, how long ago was this?
This was 1990, 91.
Yeah, it was 90. Following us,
and you worked at Microsoft?
I worked from 1984. Actually, I can tell you the exact date. June 6, 19. No, I'm getting this wrong. No, I'm wrong. I started on June 15th, 1984. I went through June 6, 1997. I ended on D-Day of 97. Seemed like an appropriate day to end my relationship.
And we've had geek dinners before.
Yeah, 2 or 3 times, yeah.
And you worked on the first version of Mac Word, right?
I did Mac. Okay, I can give you the tick list: Mac Word 1, Mac Word 3, Mac Word 4,
Mac Word 3, 301.
Well, forget the sub releases. That's stupid. No, but 3.0, 4.0, lead programmer for 5.0, and then on Mac I contributed on. What do we call that release? I guess it was that was called Word 6, and then Word 90. On Mac it was Word 98. On Windows I helped for the last 6 months shipping of WinWord 1. What became WinWord 6, we call that T3 because it was a third version of Windows Word, and then we changed the sequence number to match the Mac release because that was just going to be too confusing, and then Word 97 on Windows. So I know Word still. I can dream about Word. I know different things that are in it.
So the name that came up, you weren't there, but Perillo.
Yeah.
Perillo? Yeah. Somebody was asking about Richard R. Brody.
Oh yeah.
And you say, you know Richard Brody.
Oh
Richard
God,
R. Brody.
Richard was the first. When I walked in the door, we were at the Northup building at that time in 1984 in the middle of June, and I walked in the door, and the first person in the development hall as I walk in is Richard. And Richard at that time was 22-year-old developer, 23. He basically had written 90-some% of PC Word 1 by himself. And then the last 6 months or so, he had like 2 other people or 3 other people help him write the thing. He was Charles Simone's intern at Xerox PARC, and he learned how to do features in Bravo X, and actually must have learned quite a bit of the design of Bravo X because nothing was hard for Richard in PC Word 1. I mean, he figured, mice, what's the heck's problem with mice? Running a laser printer, no sweat, all this. I mean, the undo stuff that everybody takes for granted. That was the first implementation of undo. So Richard's funny, and I think that this was within a few days of the time when Microsoft had to do a recall of Mac Multiplan, and that's the story on that was that Bill came into work that day and said, well, write it, make a decision that just flushes $1 million down the drain, and you just keep going. And Richard was laughing at the statement.
At Geek Dinners, you've told me a lot of stories about Bill, right?
I don't know. I never really had that much contact with Bill, but I do remember one time on MacWord 1, so I started working on MacWord in August of '84.
How many employees were there?
How
many employees were at Microsoft back then?
At the time that I joined, it was probably about 610, somewhere between 610 and 650. This was middle of the summer, end of recruiting season in the middle of 1984. But anyway, so I was working on a team with Charles Simone and Ken Shapiro, and I'm trying to remember some of the other people.
Ray Graham.
Well, no, those guys came on later. But Mike Koss helped out on this. Ruth Adelhock helped out on it. Barbara Bell helped out on it. I'm trying to remember. There's now a guy who's now, I just read a report of his in Science News, David Palmer. He's now an astrophysicist, but he was just basically doing the summers before he went to Caltech, and very droll guy. So yeah, had a whole group of folks. It was mostly before we got there. It was mostly Ken Shapiro, and Ruth, and anyway, the sequences. We had a whole bunch of Mac apps that needed to go out. We had promised at the Mac rollout that we're going to do an entire suite of products, and so you had Multiplan having to come out first, and then Chart. And that Chart was in its last throes just as I walked in the door, and so I didn't get to do anything on the Mac till that was done. And that was Charles Simoni basically working like 85 to 90-hour weeks, 100-hour weeks, this whole period, getting each of these out in sequence. And then finally, middle of August, the 13th of August, we could start working on MacWord. So we walked in, and I'm totally wet behind the ears, don't know anything about this code or anything, but Simoni had a war room that was probably no larger than this room, had whiteboards all around it, and he says, well, I think you're going to live here for a while, and your job is to reduce the initialize time of this thing from what it currently is, which at that time was, I think, around 98 seconds or 102 seconds, something like that, and get it down to something that's reasonable. And so I just spent and the job was swap tune this thing. This was on these Macintoshes that would sing to you as they operated, because they had this variable speed drive, and it just go grinding and it sounded like Song of the Whales or something.
On the floppy,
it had a variable speed floppy drive, and the thing just would saw away, just acting slow and slow and slow, and every time it was doing one of those operations, hey, this computer program is being delayed by another tenth to a quarter of a second. And when you got into swap tuning, you just see we were actually debugging on Sun workstations, so we had a Sun that was talking to your Mac, and your P-code interpreter was running on that, the means by which you debug this thing, and you're watching this blizzard of status messages going by and say, oh god, there's another module being loaded in, oh, it's getting kicked out, oh, it's coming back in, same one's coming back in. And we played around for about 6-8 weeks. We finally got down to 13 seconds. 18 seconds, something like that. I don't remember the exact figure. But the code had all kinds of problems. You could click on the, and if Ken Shapiro ever sees this, this is no criticism on Ken. He was a totally understaffed. He started off doing a translation layer between PC Word and this, and ended up that you could hope that it worked, but ended up it didn't work. So a different approach was necessary. Basically, I had to punch holes in that translation layer to make it perform nicely. Yeah. So Simoni was fearless about that, and he was able to do that. But it did lead to bad feelings between Ken Shapiro and Charles. They actually had an office. Well, at first, Charles was down the hall from Ken, and after a while, Charles moved right in next to Ken, and so they were shouting over the wall to each other, Ken, Charles, and it ended up that Ken was also the keeper of the Macintosh documentation, and you had to, and his office, the relight was covered with butcher paper because you weren't supposed to see the activity in his office. So they're just shouting back and forth over the office. I'm in the war room, catty cornered to them, listening to all this go on. And Charles is making major changes to Ken's code, and Ken is getting a little irate.
Now we yell at each other through.
Okay, so anyway, the Bill Gates story I had.
Yeah.
Okay, well, so anyway, Charles Simoni had just gotten his citizenship in the United States. He had been a Hungarian citizen, and I think sometime in '84 he got his citizenship papers. That finally meant that he was safe for him to go back to Hungary and visit his parents. He hadn't done it since he came over to the United States. He had escaped from military service in Hungary by graduating 2 years early from high school, getting a job at Regnen Centralen in Denmark with Peter Nauer and a crew. Charles always talked about this teakwood computer, Danish modern furnished computer that he would use, for these folks that are doing Gear Algol, that language. And so he did that as a 17-year-old. He came to the United States to study in the Bay Area, I think at Cal Berkeley. And so from that point on, he was self-sufficient in the United States, getting his education, finally got his PhD, I think, from Stanford. And that's where part of Microsoft released apps culture having to do with Hungarian notation was invented during the form writing of that paper. So he was there. So anyway, he got his permission to go back to Hungary, and so it ended up that he was going to be gone starting the weekend, or the Saturday before Thanksgiving, and come back like the Sunday after Thanksgiving. And we've been working just crazily hard during the whole period, 80, 90, 100 hours, for ever since August, and it's now November. And we continued that pace till I think February or early March. So the second that Charles got on the airplane, he was actually flying out on the Concorde. My family and I actually went down and watched the Concorde take off when Charles was leaving, because I'd never seen the Concorde before. I wanted to see it. It's a very cool airplane. He took off. From that moment on, Ken Shapiro did not show up at the office for the rest of the week. He hit the ski slopes instantly. I was like, "Where are you, Ken? Man, I'm dying here." So I actually came in on Thanksgiving evening. We had our own family Thanksgiving, and we just my wife and my little son Greg, who was 3 at the time, and anyway, they sat in the beanbag chairs over in the corner, around the corner from the war room, and I'm sitting in there working, and then Bill comes down at about 9 o'clock at night, wanted to know how everything was going, and I basically had to report to the project, status of the project at 9 o'clock, and it was interesting. It was interesting. It ended up that everybody else is taking off time too, during that time, but I was the new guy. I figured I did not have that luxury, and I wanted to I actually wanted to learn this stuff and do my best. I don't think in my as a 6-month Microsoft programmer, I don't think I was incredibly effective at that time, but I did pretty well.
Now, since I have both of you,
Yeah.
What's the secret to leading a software team?
Oh, I don't think I'm the right person, but
you were responsible for MacWord 5. The shirt
yeah,
said
MacWord 5 was good. I mean, some of the things that I thought were valuable about leading it were, one of the things that for the quality of the product was to be a very passionate user of the program. I think all the MacWord releases were MacWord 1 was not that well received, but MacWord 3, MacWord 4, MacWord 5 all were very pretty good successes. I should say 3.0 was not because of the bugs that were shipped in it, but 3.01 I should say so 3.01, 4, and 5 were very well received, and 5.1 after that.
I came to Microsoft because of MacWord 4.
Oh, okay. Yeah, so you like the table stuff and all that.
It's what I used in college, and I remember bringing up the credits. So basically, I brought up the credits, and I interviewed at Microsoft and going in the hall, and it was embarrassing because he used to work for Chris Mason.
Oh yeah, right, sure.
He's the guy.
Shane and Chris Mason.
And I showed up, and it's my first day, and they introduced me like, "Oh, this is Chris Mason." He goes, "Hi, it's nice to meet you." My email is Chris M, and I'm shaking his hand, and I go like, "You're Chris?" Because I'd seen this name in the credits the entire time. When I was using the product in college. He just shakes his head and he walks off. Right, so what do you do? Yes, I'm Chris M. You saw my name in the credits. I'm going to go get lunch.
Yeah, I can imagine him doing that. But that's funny. Yeah, but anyway, the thing, I think the thing that worked in all those was that, for MacWord 3, Charles Simoni was just dying to get features into the product that he was going to be able to use, and he'd come in the next morning and he had worked. He was fairly regular on his hours. He would get there at 10 o'clock. He'd work till like 5 till 6. Come back at about 7:30 and work till 11 or midnight. And sometimes you stretch it to 1 in the morning. But you'd come in the next morning, all of a sudden something incredibly major had been done that just was not anticipated.
But how much? Right? Like the first 50, 60, 70, 80%?
Oh, what do you mean? You mean of
what Charles would do? Because I think that's part of the killer. Because somebody comes in and does this heroic effort and gives you the first 70%.
Yeah, I'm not sure how large it was. Sometimes it was, I would say, as large as 30, 40%. So there was actually quite a lot of polish being done, but the capability was there. I do remember him working on the equation editor for one of those releases that had been done. I remember him coming in with the outline processor just kind of almost overnight. He had been looking at the stuff that my now friend Dave Weiner was doing back then, and saying, I didn't know how to do that stuff in using the style, how to pervert the styles in the style sheets code that's inside of Word to implement a outline thing, and actually how to do it in parallel views. So you have a normal view and a outline view going on at the same time.
Right.
In split windows. So yeah, he did that stuff. So it was thrilling to watch that kind of stuff going on. Wow.
Thrilling.
One guy can do that. My goodness.
I think it's thrilling and terrifying.
Yeah.
Well, yeah. I mean, the standard is incredibly high, but it is, I mean, the other thing I do remember the question when Charles was considering features, he'd come up with a proposal and you do it. His constant question: what's the benefit? And then you'd have to be very, very crisp and very clean in your thinking, saying what the benefit is, and you had to think of what the detriments are for what you were proposing to, and you'd be really clean about it. I think the main reason those programs are super successes is that the lead developers and the people working on them really wanted those pieces of code, and they use that code all the time.
Yeah.
And when the specs.
How much time do you have?
10 minutes.
And when you live and breathe, when you're using something, right? If you live in that thing all day, you care about it. It's your home. You want it to be great. So
after a while, you understood why you thought what the standard of quality is in your product. Inside of Microsoft Word, we prided ourselves in not flashing the program. Okay, so I don't know if you remember, but you have, when you, in a word processor, you have this text that is moving on screen, and there's some part of it many times that can be preserved, and then there's the stuff that has not appeared on screen and has to be there. The simplistic way of updating the screen back in those days was, well, geez, you just wipe the screen completely clean and you start doing it from the top. Yeah. And you do that, the screen looks like a nuclear strike is happening. Yeah. If you were looking in the dark, you'd see flash, 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 and people don't even really notice it's going on, but they get tired, and when they get tired, they get grumpy, and when they get grumpy, after a while, I say, this piece of program is a pile of, it's just not worth using anymore. It ended up that WordPerfect in this era, they did not have GUI lore. They were just learning how to do that themselves. They had put off doing it as long as possible, and they decided they could not have their ass kicked on the Mac for as long as they were. They decided to go ahead and do it. This is their first experience, and they had none of that kind of lore about.
Or we got the first build, Bartley Hendricks.
Bartley, yeah. Our lead tester, wonderful tester.
And he literally sat down with this thing, and just context on Bartley, world's nicest guy, right? You don't want to fly in an airplane with him. Because he'd look at you and say, look, you drop the table down and recline your seat at the same time, and you can make an engine fall off. And I can repro this problem.
I can do it in any airplane you bring me to.
Right, he was just that good at finding how to break stuff. So I remember you and me and David McInnes and Bartley and Doug Scott were sitting around in Bartley's office, and he got the fresh little floppies. He's running Mac WordPerfect for the first time. And it's score at will as a sports thing. He was crashing it at will. He was just sitting there playing with it. Tipped over. Over.
So it basically could not get a complete utterance out. He was able to. That's a separate thing. But the thing that I was super offended about in this program was the fact that they flashed you to death, and that just was not going to happen in code that I was. Had a responsibility for.
The Mac Word, I used your products back in college, and it was very good stuff. Yeah. That's really what got me into computers was Mac Word and PageMaker and Quark Express.
Yeah. Yep.
That late 80s.
Yeah, no, it was good.
Mac Word 4 was a magical product in so many ways.
Yeah. It was hard. Doing tables the way we did, that was actually the hard. If you mention a release, I can tell you what was hard about them. In Mac Word 4,
we won't go through the.
I know.
Just remember, you and I were talking a while ago, and when I saw that you were here, I ran up to you and said, "Look, David Luebbert here. You got to talk to this guy, even if it's just a little bit today, because in terms of the history of Microsoft applications, Macintosh and Windows, what were we thinking, and how did stuff happen, and why did it happen, and what was hard about it. To me, David was
Microsoft is a great company because of its bet on the Macintosh.
You're absolutely right. I mean, the thing was, we could, Windows needed. It was just too hard. It was very hard to lever Windows up to because of its heritage, where it was basically a layer on top of DOS, and you had the DOS underpinnings, and you also had a little bit underpowered machinery, and certainly the manufacturers weren't. They were very resistant in doing the graphics modes necessary to do a GUI type of thing. So it just was just a horrible fight on that to get them to even budge. Say, God, we're going to be able to do such great stuff with it. Forget it. We're selling this stuff right now. We don't have to do it. Well, the Macintosh was what gave Microsoft leverage to do it. To say, well, okay, you don't want to do it. We're going to build it on the Mac. The Mac, Steve Jobs believes this stuff. He's going to give us a nice bitmap screen. It's going to be fast enough. It's going to have large enough memory. It will have a floppy, it'll have a hard disk. Despite his, actually, it was.
I got
it was Jobs' business. He for some reason was against putting a hard disk in, and that I think that was one of the reasons the board kicked him out the first time. But it was necessary. And when the Apple company produced that stuff, then we were able to make a great deal of progress.
It was your learning on the Mac.
Oh yeah, we learned
into Windows.
We learned basically 5 years of lore that by being courageous enough to do that when the other guys started, they had years of learning that we're perfect basically sank themselves on this particular issue. I'd have to think that it didn't help Ashton Tate very much on this issue. It did not help Lotus at all to put off that learning as long as they did.
Users expected. You say if you're saying
we invented stuff.
Since we're probably running out of tape, but how do you turn a team onto new stuff? Because obviously Microsoft got on the Mac. That probably wasn't a popular decision back then.
Well, I don't know. This is kind of crazy considering that we were Microsoft programmers, but it ended up that every programmer on the Macworld team except for Charles, we had our private little projects that we did. The end up, I don't know if you ever came across the VIP editor. It's now called Source Dynamics Editor. That was Ray Graham. That was his private project starting during Macworld 3 or somewhere between Macworld 3 and Macworld 4. He wasn't kept busy enough, and he said, "I want to write an editor."
So all these developers, everybody had this interesting side project. Chris Mason
did
had
rabbit
this crazy.
Programs.
He had like a brother-in-law who bred rabbits and had to keep track of the genetics.
The breedings, and he had a program that predicted the rabbit genetics.
Right, and because of that program, you got the drop-down combo that you see all over GUIs, because he was like, I want it to be a drop-down, but I want to be able to type into it, and it didn't exist. So we invented it, turned it into a
Ray Graham invented the idea of a movable modal dialog on Apple Macintoshes. A modal dialog was fixed in place; you could not move it out of place.
I remember.
And Ray did.
Well, Ray says that's kind of silly. Okay, so I can make a modeless dialog, make it look modal, and make it movable. And then, we waited for about 18 months, and then Apple put that in, made a big deal that was in their toolkit. Hey, Ray, it's the Ray Graham memorial feature of the Apple Macintosh.
You got 2 minutes, I think.
So how do you, your team just came out with RSS, right?
Yeah.
How do you motivate your team to get on something new, to change a platform, you did it back in,
it's an example business more than anything. My deal was that I had one we called our project Rimshot for Macworld 5, and that was actually a prediction of how this is going to go. I figured we're going to throw the ball up and it's going to spin a bunch of times and look like it's going to go out and then it'll go through the hole. And also I was a jazz enthusiast, and there's also a meaning that it's the loud crack on the side of a drum set when you hit it with a drumstick, but I liked it for both of those reasons. It was Rimshot, and the reason I felt that way about the project was that we were a little bit understaffed. I was in the project, Dave McInnes had done one release, totally brilliant young programmer, and then everybody else is newly hired. So Rick Shout, who's still at Microsoft. And
so nobody knew what was impossible.
Yeah.
Right?
But
they didn't know it was going to be hard. They just said, "Hey, there's this thing. Go make this happen." And we did.
And we gave him some example on how to do it, and it was unfortunately the project ended up being a death march. I believe, by the way, I'm the person. Somebody can prove me wrong, but I believe I'm the person who introduced that term to the computer industry. Because I did, it ended up that I would have to consider Macword 1, Macword 3, Macword 4, Macword 5, and the last bit of Windward 1. Actually, for the people who were in Windward 1, they'd have to say, yeah, the last 2 years were a death march too. Those were all,
Would you do that again?
Not in my current age. Can't do it at the current age. As a young, as a 30-year-old, yeah, I'd still do it. But it is a harsh. It's harsh on your family, so I don't know if for a balanced life, I would not recommend it. I've had to unlearn a lot of that stuff, but
It's hard to
in that period, it seemed like it was the right thing to do. I probably was, in some ways, making mistakes by doing it, but I did do it, and at least for the Microsoft Corporation, it had good effects, I think.
Yeah.
I think you're.
Look,
All I know is that I'm glad that you know each other through geek dinners.
Yeah.
All I'm saying, right? I don't know if the Dave's going around. It's like Dave was one of my first mentors. If I think about what I know today, I got to attribute a lot of it to Dave.
Well, thank you very much. Appreciate hearing that.
Well,